What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So I saw some sad news yesterday. Probably showing my age a little bit with this one. I was a precocious kid, so I was looking at things that were a little bit above my age range, or I used to watch uh, stand-up specials or shows that are probably a little bit beyond my years. I'm 43, so I think this guy, unless you're closing in on 50 and over, you probably don't know who he is, and maybe it's a cultural thing as well. But comedian Richard Lewis died this week. I think it was Tuesday. He was 76 years old, and apparently died of a heart attack at home. Last year, he announced via social media that he had been having some health woes as of late, that he had recently retired from stand-up comedy. I think it was 3 years ago. And then he had a litany of health issues, multiple surgeries, a surgery on his shoulder, a surgery on his knee, I believe it was, and his hip. And that he had recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, but that, he had been doing well. So this kind of is a bit of a shock. But Richard Lewis, the stand-up comedian, he first achieved fame in the 70s and 80s with his trademark acerbic, dark sense of humor. And he later parlayed that quality into an acting career that included movies like Robin Hood Men in Tights. Whenever I think of Richard Lewis, I think of him as the what's the word? What term would you use? The illegitimate king in Robin Hood Men in Tights. I always think of him in that role, and I remember him being in John Candy's last movie, Wagons East. As a matter of fact, I believe it was Richard Lewis and someone else that actually discovered John Candy's body in his trailer that terrible March morning in 1994. I also remember him being on, I think one of the last things he did was he had a recurring role on Curb Your Enthusiasm as a fictionalized version of himself. And Mr. Lewis was among the best known names in a generation of comedians who came of age during the 70s and 80s, marked by a world-weary, sarcastic wit that mapped well onto the urban malaise in which many of them plied their trade. After finding success as a comedian in New York nightclubs, he became a regular on late night talk shows, favored as much for his tight routine as for his casual, open affability as an interviewee. He appeared on the Late Night with David Letterman a staggering 48 times, and he was at the forefront of the boom in stand-up comedy that came with the expansion of cable television in the late 1980s. Neurotic and self-deprecating, typically dressed all in black, Mr. Lewis paced the stages of comedy clubs, hanging his head, pulling at his shock of black hair, riffing on his struggles in life and love. He called himself the Prince of Pain, and so did his legion of fans. The titles of his many comedy specials from the 80s tells it all. I'm in pain, I'm exhausted, I'm doomed. He built some of his anecdotal bits around the idea of the worst possible version of an everyday figure, the waiter from hell, the doctor from hell. In 2006, the Yale Book of Quotations honored him with an entry for the blank from hell credited to him. He came by his art naturally. There was no faking his misery and misery, but also through astute attention to the anxiety-inducing and neurosis-triggering details of everyday life. And like I said before, he was able to transfer from stand-up comedy to movies. He also had a short-lived sitcom called Anything But Love, in which he co-starred with Jamie Lee Curtis. And he also appeared on a show called Daddy Dearest, in which he co-starred with Don Rickles. It did not do very well. But he also appeared in movies, as I said, Robin Hood Men in Tights. He had a small role in Leaving Las Vegas, and also appeared in a movie called Hugo Pool. And he came back to his stand-up roots in the late 90s. And he struggled throughout his life with alcohol, drugs, and depression. He became sober in the mid-1990s and wrote about his experience in his 2000 memoir, The Other Great Depression, How I'm Overcoming on a Daily Basis at least 1 million addictions and dysfunctions and finding a spiritual, sometimes life. One hell of a title. So rest in peace, Richard Lewis, 76 years old.